Here we're going to create a simple iOS 09 app for picking lucky lottery numbers. So here's what our app's going to look like. There'll be 6 buttons, and the title on each button will represent one of the 6 lucky numbers. The user will be able to tap any one of these buttons to pick a new lucky number for that particular button, or can tap the pick button, which will pick a whole new 6 set of lucky numbers. There will also be a segmented control that will allow the user to choose their lucky numbers between 1 and 49 or between 1 and 56. So we notice the numbers will be all unique. So this would be the case where you had, say, 56 ping pong balls, of which 6 would be selected. This particular app is made completely out of stock controls, so it'll be very easy to put together. We're going to be using the Model View Controller software design pattern, and Apple makes heavy use of this. And the idea here, the goal, is to decouple the user interface elements from the internal logic. So we're going to classify all of our objects into one of 3 classes. Objects that are view objects, these will be things like buttons and segmented controls and labels and things that the viewer sees in the app and can interact with. They're a part of the user interface. On the other hand, model objects are going to be part of the underlying logic. So we're going to write a class for generating lucky numbers, and we're going to create one instance of that class, and it's going to be completely user interface agnostic. And so the idea is I could drop that object in a completely different app with a different user interface and reuse it. So the idea is to separate the user interface from the underlying logic. And then there'll be a controller. In our case, it's just going to be a simple single page app, single view app, and there'll be one controller, and the controller acts as the mediator between the model and the view. So the controller knows how to talk to the model, the controller knows how to talk to the view. The view and the controller can talk to each other, and the model objects and the controller can talk to each other. So that's the pattern we're going to use. So we're going to start off by creating a new app, and in that app, it's the template that we're going to use is all we're going to create a controller for us, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use Interface Builder tool in Xcode to lay out all the objects in our view. And then after we get that all working, then we'll talk about how the view objects can interact with the controller, and then we'll create our model object, hook it up, and then we'll finish the app and make everything work together. So let's go ahead and open up Xcode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to make sure that under the template chooser here, I choose under iOS, I choose application, and we're just going to do a simple single view application. So I want Xcode to just create a template for a simple single view application. So I'm going to go ahead and call this thing Lucky Lotto. Give it a name. You can give it an organization name, an organization identifier. That would be important later for when you want to sign the app or put it in the App Store. And the language we're going to use is Swift, and I'm going to make it a universal app. So I want this to be able to run on any iPhone or iPad. And so go ahead and create a Git repository for this thing and create, and you'll see what's set up for us is the Xcode will create a template for us that already has our storyboard set up for us and already has a view controller that we're going to use. So we already got our controller, and our storyboard is going to contain our user interface items. So you're going to start with a square view controller, and it's going to be, I'm going to lay this out to work on any iOS device. So the fact that it's square, now Apple doesn't make any kind of device that's square, but I'm going to design it as if they did have a square app, and then I'm going to make sure this looks good in portrait mode, landscape mode, on any of the various devices. All right, so here's in Interface Builder, when I select the storyboard interface builder, I got a view of my main controller here. And the idea of a storyboard contains a set of nib files. A set of nib files are files that contain serialized user interface components. So what we're going to do is actually lay out our user interface graphically right here, and Xcode's actually going to create the objects and serialize them and place them in what's called a nib file, and that nib file is going to be buried inside this storyboard. And that's going to in this case, our storyboard is just going to have one scene because we only have one view in our app. So let me just walk you through this. So kind of got two views of our storyboard. On the right, I'm going to have my visual view of the storyboard, and kind of on the left part here, you're going to have sort of a hierarchical view of the storyboard. So over here, we have the inspector, and down here on the bottom right, we have sort of our goodie box that we can choose user interface elements out of. So I'm going to go start by finding a simple UI view, and I'm going to drag it out here. And this is a view, inside this view is going to go all of my user interface elements. This is kind of be my backing view. And I'm going to go ahead, just so we can see it, I'm going to go ahead and set its background color to something we can see. And then I'm going to go ahead and size it so it's just, I'm going to follow these blue guidelines. And so I'm just below the status bar area where the battery is here. And then I'm going to stretch it out so it kind of fills the entire view. Right? So you can see over here in the inspector, I have the attributes inspector tab selected. So that's going to be my backing view, and you can see that's going to be a subview of the main view. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that this always sizes itself correctly. So I'm down here in the bottom right, you're going to see some tools that we're going to use frequently. The one that I'm interested in here is the tool for pitting the edges of this view like I want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these struts. I'm going to go ahead, turn off the constraint to margins, and I'm going to set all these struts to 0 so that this view will be sized to the view correctly like I want. So the 0 means that it's going to be 0 points from the left edge, 0 points from the right edge, 0 points from the top, and 0 points from the bottom. Actually, it's going to be 0 points from the bottom of the status bar here. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 4 constraints. And then I'm going to go ahead and find a UI button, and I'm going to drag it out here. So this is going to be one of my 6 buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and groom it. So over here in the attributes inspector, I'm going to go ahead and change its title to 01. And then I'm going to make this kind of look good. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a font. I'm going to choose a bold system font, and I'm going to use a 30-point font. Right, so there's one of my buttons. And I'm going to go ahead and set its background color. So if I go down to the view component here and find a background color that looks good, I don't know, maybe I'll pick something that I can see. I can always change this later. Right? So there's one of my buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just copy and paste. So I'm going to copy Command C, Command V, and I'm going to make another copy of that. I'm actually going to make 6 copies of this. Actually 5 copies. So I'll end up having 6 buttons. Right, so here we go. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and change the titles of each of these 6 buttons. And I'm just going to label these give them the titles of the numbers that I'm interested in right now. Oops, it's going to be 04 and 2, 3. Oops, I used 3 twice. Okay, here's 4. This one's going to be 5. And this is going to be, 6. All right. So there's my 6 buttons. Don't worry about how they're sized. So I want to make sure these buttons are all arranged horizontally and they're all the same size and equally spaced. So there's iOS 9 provides now what is known as a stack view. So if I've got these sort of laid out horizontally already, I'm just going to select them all. And using this little tool down on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and say embed it in a stack view. So you can see that all 6 of my buttons now are embedded in a stack view. So in the attributes inspector, I can see that my stack view aligns everything horizontally. And I want the distribution to fill everything equally And then I'm also going to set the spacing so that there are 8 points between each button, right? So now I've got this situation where I have a stack view. Oops, undo here. Grab my stack view. You notice I can select, sometimes it's easier to select things over here in the hierarchical view of the nib than the interface builder. So I'm going to grab that and center it. So, right now, currently I don't have any constraints set for this. So you see if I go ahead and I run this app, go ahead and build. I'll have some warnings here. Go ahead and run this app. You can see, yeah, the buttons don't really appear where I want them to be, and of course, if I rotate the app, they're not going to be where I want them to be. So I'm going to go ahead and set some constraints. Hardware, rotate right. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this stack view. So I'm going to go ahead and set some constraints here. So with my stack view selected, what I'm going to do is down here on the right, I'm going to choose this alignment button down here, and I'm going to make sure that it's aligned horizontally and vertically in the container. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 2 constraints here. So now you'll notice if I go ahead and rerun the app that sure enough, here we go, my buttons end up in the center no matter whether I'm rotated left or right. And you can see when I'm in portrait mode that there's a status bar, and my backing view is right below that status bar. My matrix view and my buttons are right in the center. You can see when I rotate left, that goes away. I'm going to rotate right, and there. So there we go. All right. So let's quickly add our other components. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a UI label out of my goodie box here. And I'm going to throw that up here above it, and in the attributes inspector, I'm going to change this to Lucky Lotto Picker, and I'm going to change its font to also be a bold system font of size 30, and of course it's all right. So what I'm going to do is I want this to always be centered right over the top of this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control drag between the label and the matrix and the stack view. Sorry, between my label and my stack view. And it's actually easier to do it over here in the hierarchical view. So I'm actually going to hold the control button and control drag from Lucky Lotto Picker up to the stack view and release, and I'm going to say center horizontally. So I'll make sure that they're always horizontal. And then while I have my label selected, I'm also going to go down here in this little TIE Fighter icon, and I'm going to pin the distance from that. So with the label selected, I'm going to pin the distance so it's always 8 pixels above, or 8 points above the matrix. I'm going to go ahead and add that particular constraint. Now obviously I got some orange lines here, so some of my constraints are not up to date. So I'm going to use look at the little TIE Fighter thing that looks like it has a triangle in the middle, and with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and update frames. And so that's kind of what things look like right now. I actually want to make these buttons a little bit bigger. So what I'm actually going to do is, with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and make this stack view as wide. Actually, I'm going to make it 90% as wide as the backing view. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to control drag from the stack view to my backing view, and I'm going to release, and I'm going to say equal width. And then with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and say update frames, and you can see that's really equal widths is not quite what I want. So I'm going to select the stack view again. And I'm going to go over here in the size inspector tab, and I'm going to find where that constraint was. So notice I've got equal widths. I'm going to edit that and actually set the multiplier to 0.9. And so now it's going to be 90% of the width. And they're kind of short buttons. I actually want to make the buttons a little bit taller. So with that selected, with my stack view selected, I'm actually going to go ahead and set the aspect ratio. So actually using the square TIE Fighter button, I'm going to click the aspect ratio and add that constraint. And I'm going to find that constraint over here, 45, and I'm going to edit that as well. And I'm going to make my aspect ratio to be 6:1. There. So there's what my buttons look like now. So let's run that real quick and see what we got. So yeah, so you can kind of see that's what my buttons look like. I can rotate left. I can rotate right. Fabulous. All right. So I'm going to take another label here, and this is for my segmented control, and I'm going to give in the attribute inspector, I'm going to change the label to title to max value. I'm going to leave it as its current font size, but I am going to make sure it's centered, and let's see, yeah, good. So then what I'm going to do is I always want this to be right below my second button here. So I'm going to do a little trick. I'm going to control drag from there to the button, and I'm going to say center horizontally. Right, so that's always centered horizontally. And I also want to make sure, I'm going to use the little square type fighter again, and I'm going to make sure that this is always say 20 pixels. So I'm going to select this top I-beam and make sure this is set, and I'm going to add that constraint. And so it's going to be, I've got these orange constraints. I'm going to go ahead and fix that by doing update frames. And you can see, okay, that's my max value. It's always going to be right below that button, centered with it, and 20 points below it. So now I'm going to go find a segmented control. And I'm going to drag that out here as well. And I'm going to make the title on the first button to be a 49 and the title on the second button to be a 56. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm going to control drag from that to the label, and I'm also going to center those horizontally as well. And with the segmented control selected, I'm going to use the square TIE Fighter again and make sure I'm going to select the I-beam so that I'm always 8 pixels below that max value tag. So I'm going to add that one constraint. And at any time, if you get some orange lines, you can usually update the frame so it's laid out in the story view according to the storyboard according to the constraints that you've set. So I've got one more thing I want to add, and that's my big pick button. So I'm going to create a new pick button, and I'm going to put this right below the 5. I'm going to change its title to pick, and I'm going to change its font to be a bold system font again of size 30. And I want that button, I'm going to control drag, so that's always underneath the 5. So I'm going to center it horizontally with the 5 button. And I'm also going to center it vertically with the segmented control. And then I'm going to say update frames, and that should be right where I want it. So let's go ahead and save that and make sure it looks like we like it here. So, okay, that's what it looks like. If I rotate left, okay, if I rotate right, all right, that's pretty much what we want. So you notice I can press any of the buttons, I can press the segmented control, but of course nothing does anything at this point. So in this stage, what we've done is we've laid out our view elements. So in the next video, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and hook up our view elements, make some connections between our view elements and our controller so that the controller and our view elements can talk with one another.